live. So let's just catch up first. So how's your first week? How is everybody's first week? Nobody is responding. Come on. So, Qijia, how is your first week?
Sorry.
Qijia,
Hi,
how's your first week?
I was
我看到 Ashley 了，
Okay, how can I help you?
没开啊，我看好多人都没开。
Yinfeng, I can hear you talking.
Alright, sorry about
You
that.
can talk to me. We haven't started, don't worry. We're just, catching up now. I would like to see your faces. While we are waiting for others, just turn your camera so that I know what you look like. Okay, thanks, Eileen. I think it's always good that you show yourself to your peers and to me. Well, in case you need help later and you ask me, Pan, can you help me with this? Can you give me a hand, etc. So I don't know who you are. Why should I help you? And you don't even bother to turn on your camera. And why should I help you in the very end when you need? So, it's important that you show yourself and to people and to me. And it's important. We need this connection. And I'm emphasizing this again. It's important. So Karina, right? And Jingchi, hello. Yeah, and Xinyu and Steph. Okay. So what is the time there if you are overseas? For example, if you're in China, who are in China at the moment? I do remember when you were circling the map, remember? Some people were in Vietnam, some were circling North Korea and Indonesia and Australia. Yeah. So are we all in Sydney now? Let me check. Sun Sophia, are you in Sydney? Sun Sophia? Turn on your mic.
China now. Sorry.
You're in China now. What's the time there? Which city?
2 if you know it. It's 7 a.m.
Oh, it's 7 a.m. Okay, yeah. So I just got up, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So it's pretty early. I'm a little bit tiring.
Yeah.
Already.
Yeah. I know. I guess a lot of people are just getting up now. If you can, sleep early the night before, and then you can get up early in the morning. And when you get up early in the morning, it's more, it's better for you. You get more energy.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah. And it's good for your body. It's good for your health. And if you don't want to age so fast, you'd better sleep early. Yeah. So I'm talking to all of you, right? So do not burn midnight oil. It's no good for your health. It's no good for your beauty. Okay. Especially for girls. Yeah. Okay. Now I'm going to share my files with you and then let's get started. But I do hope we could, each time we could catch up at the very beginning by turn on our cameras just to show each other and say hi, to build this connection before we start the lesson. Yeah? Okay. And I'm gonna share my screen and let's get the lesson started today. Well, I'm sharing my screen. Just give me a minute. I better share my computer sound. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, so for this week, we are going to look at marriage, family, and mobility in China. So for us, I would like all of us to have to think some of the things we learned from week 1. So we're doing this short catch up, the recap each time before we start a new lesson. So I would like to give you 5 minutes just to think, recall your mind. What is cisgender in your own words? See if you could define that just to show your understanding of that. And what about transgender? And what type of feminists uphold the idea that patriarchy is the source of gender inequality and women's liberation can only be achieved through revolutionary change? Yeah. And the third question is, what is gender role socialization? So here are some terms I want you to remember. And then we're talking about the women's bell, if you remember. I'm pretty sure you have discussed in the tutorial as well. And why is that important? Why we should know the thing called the women's bell, 女戒中 in Chinese. And the last question is, when was the new cultural movement, or you call it the May 4th movement, 五四运动 in Chinese, and why is that important for gender development in China? So you're having 5 minutes. I am going to check with you at around 9:16 and to see if you could answer the questions correctly. Yeah, so just 5 minutes self-thinking time. You have another 2 minutes. can hear somebody's phone. The message keeps coming. So if you could mute your mic, then that'll be helpful. And 1 minute. Okay, time is up. Anyone? The first question, cisgender and transgender. How do you understand these two terms in your own words? Should I just randomly call anybody as no one is responding? Should I just randomly call, say, okay, great, Janet, please.
So cisgender is essentially the gender you're born with. So if you're born as a female and your gender is also a female. So transgender is if you're born a female but you want to change to another gender. So I guess they're sort of opposites.
Great. Yeah, well summarized. So if one's internal sense of gender, which is whose gender identity corresponds with the person's sex at birth, then that's transgender. Then that's cisgender, right? But if that's the opposite, one's internal sense of gender doesn't really match the person's sex at birth, then that is transgender. Okay, good, thank you. And for CIS, cis, by the way, it means on this side of. And for trans means on the other side of. If you remember that, and that may help you to remember the meaning and the difference between these two. Okay, and the second one, what type of feminists uphold that idea? That patriarchy is the source of gender inequality and women's liberation can only be achieved through revolutionary change. The type of feminism.
Maybe radical feminist?
Yeah, definitely. That's correct. Radical feminists uphold such idea. And the third question, what is gender role socialization? We're all in it. Everybody is in it. What does that mean? Gender role socialization.
Does it mean that life is like we are living in a gendered world so that society, our culture values divided us into different genders?
Not quite. Partly right. Yeah. Anybody else? Let's give it a try. Gender role socialization.
That it's the lifelong process of learning to be either male or female, and it's primarily due to our socialization. So what we hear from family, schools, peers, and media. Okay, yeah, that's great. That's correct. Yep. So in this process, gender relations are learned, basically. They're produced and reproduced every moment. We get those from the key institutions, just like what Steph said, right? Schools, universities, families, the media, etc. So because of that, at the same time, unequal gender relations are reinforced through this gender role socialization. Yeah, good. And what is the Women's Bill? What is 女界中? Women's Bill. And why is that important? It's somebody's work, right? Yeah.
It's written by Jin Tianhe, and is it the first book that advocated for women's rights?
Good, and there's a key term, What's that key term introduced in that pamphlet? You're there, Annabella. Almost there.
Woman 女权.
Great, yeah, women's right, 女权, that key term, firstly entered the Chinese social and political discourse. Okay, and that pamphlet was written in when? Roughly what period or what dynasty?
1903.
And that is the Qing dynasty, right? The late Qing dynasty. Remember that. Remember that chapter of history, which is very important, which paved the way, build the foundation for later pathways. And the final question about the new cultural movement. Many of you have learned the Chinese history, new cultural movement, 新文化运动, right? How's that to do with gender?
I think in the new cultural movement, a lot of men started advocating for women's rights and emancipation, but as an attack on Confucianism more than it is that they respected women.
Yep, correct. Yeah, and go on. And why is that important?
Maybe because publications started surfacing about women's rights and written by women authors as well. So it's the first time that women were published. So there was the New Youth publication in 1915, and the government started to adopt more of a Western model of feminine discourse.
Good. Yeah. So there was a circulation of feminist discourse during that time, due to those increasing number of publications on women's rights or, on the so-called women's problem. A lot of discourses were columns, columns run by women writers, etc. So all of these discourses were increasing during the new cultural movement. And so that's why you start to see liberal feminism started to grow during that time. And that really transformed people's understanding about gender and gender roles, that gave women, especially, the consciousness to think themselves, their own rights, their own interests, etc. But before the cultural movement, you can hardly, tell that women were really acquiring those kind of awareness. They're thinking about their legal rights, etc. No, they've never done so. It's only when somebody like the male feminist champions, they started to open up their mind, and that changed the mentality of a lot of women. And that's why the new cultural movement is so important, not only to China, but also to women. Okay, now let's move on. Today, we are going to look at a new topic, and that is called marriage, family, and mobility. Oh, my mouse. Okay, don't. Okay, here is the outline. Firstly, we are going to look at China's constitution, China's marriage law, and family planning policy. That's our first part. And second part, we're going to look at the concept of mobility. And the third part, we are going to apply that concept of mobility to the study of marriage migration. And we'll take a closer look at these two themes. The first one is rural to urban migration. Second one is transnational marriage mobility in Asia. So to get started, some of the key learning outcomes for us today is by the end of the lesson, I'm expecting you to be able to evaluate China's family planning policies, which include the one-child and the two-child policy, and also identify the types of mobilities in different scenarios. You'll be learning different forms of mobilities and a lot of terms by then. Remember them. And then you'll be able to apply the concept of mobility to the study of marriage and family in China. And that concept of mobility actually can be applied widely, not just marriage and migration in China, but this is our focus is marriage and migration. And you'll be able to articulate the terminologies used in relation to China's marriage and family policy, etc. And there will be some key vocabularies, terms to remember as well. And then we compare marriage migration in China to that transnational marriage migration in Asia. There are similarities and differences in this mobility process. Okay, some key vocabularies I've summarized for you here. That means by the end of the lesson, you should be able to explain what do these terms mean. So, which include monogamy, bigamy, polygamy, marriage squeeze, bride price, 4-to-1 problem, one child and two child policies, and different forms of mobility. So let's get started from part 1 on the Constitution, marriage law, and family planning policies. So the first one, the Constitution. The Constitution is very important. Why is that? Because the Constitution legally afforded women equal rights and protection to males. Without that, there is no legal form at the legal framework that guarantee women have equal rights to men. So all citizens, as it notes in Article 86, all citizens of China who have reached the age of 18 have the right to vote and stand for election, irrespective of their nationality, race, sex, occupation, social origin, religious belief, education, property status, or length of residence. So all citizens, that means men and women. That's why this is like the fundamental law that guarantees the equal rights. And then in Article 48, it says women in China enjoy equal rights with men. So this is mandated by the government. You can tell in this article. In all spheres of political, economic, cultural, social, and family life. So inside and outside family, women should have equal rights with men. This is from the government's paper. So, but this is one, right? You can certainly argue, in actual fact, women do not have equal rights with men. And you're right, we're going to look at that later on. Yeah. But it's always good that the government can, put a legal framework there to say women and men, they're the same. Yeah. And it also says the state protects the rights and interests of women. So the state offering, protection for women. You can tell it here. And that applies the principle of equal pay for equal work for men and women alike, and etc. So basically, the state guarantees men and women are having the same rights, and also the state also protects women. Yeah. And in Article 49, it says marriage, the family, and mother and child are protected by the state. Violation of the freedom of marriage is prohibited, and maltreatment of old people, women, and children is prohibited. So you can see in China's law, the constitution, the state is protecting women and children because women were having unequal rights in comparison with their male counterparts. That's why the state is doing that. Yeah, so the state endeavored to address that problem by putting that legal framework there. But you also need to know central and local governments' implementation of laws and policies were in line with the Constitution, with provisions on the protection of women's rights and interests. So the central framework is there, and the local framework, they should be all in line with that. Yeah. So from top up to lower level to down. That's a whole, framework built by the PRC, by the Communist Party, with the aim to protect women. And this is the constitution we need to know. And the other important law is the marriage law. So the constitution was implemented in early 1950s. And the marriage law was even earlier because the marriage law was implemented in 1950. In 1950, remember, the PRC was founded in when? In 1949, right? That's a year right after the foundation of the PRC. So in this marriage law, why is that important? Why is that milestone? Because this is China's first marriage law, and since the Communist Party, established the People's Republic of China, and the law established a new marriage and family system in China by abolishing the feudal practice of marriage and prohibited arranged and forced marriage and outlawed concubinage and promoted monogamy, free choice of marriage, and gender equality. So the law was there aiming to remove all feudalist practice of marriage customs and all kind of feudal thoughts like arranged marriage, child marriage, bigamy, etc. At the same time, it promotes monogamy. Yeah, so that means only one man and one woman could get married. You can't, as before, one man could have multiple wives. But ever since 1950, with the marriage law, one man can only have one woman, as his wife. And at the same time, as you can see, the law reduced the power of parents and reduced the power of mother-in-law. Because in the past, a mother-in-law had the ultimate power inside the family, and there's a hierarchy there within the domestic domain, and young women will have to listen, obey everything the mother-in-law said, and obey everything mandated by the father, the so-called father of the family, and her husband, and even her sons, etc. And at the same time, this law guaranteed freedom in divorce. So before the law, women couldn't really, file for divorce if they weren't happy with the marriage. But with the law, they could. And that's why you started to see this law subsequently turned into a divorce law, because a lot of women who were constrained by arranged marriages use that law as a weapon to protect themselves, to escape from unhappy marriages. Yeah, so good and bad. The minimum marriage age established at that stage was 18 for women and 20 for men. Yeah, and here are two posters you could see during that time, very Maoist style posters. It says, in marriage, keep an eye on your own interests and return radiant after registration. 婚姻自己做主张登记回来喜洋洋. So basically it glorifies the marriage law and the importance for people to follow the marriage law. And you can also see in the first poster, let me get my pen here. This is everybody was celebrating the wedding, and in this, I don't think my picture looks very good here. Anyway, and you could see the Mao Zedong portrait is hanging there on the wall, and people are very happy, and it's very revolutionary style as well, with slogans in there, and people were celebrating equality, gender equality, because of the implementation of the marriage law. Yeah. And you can see the campaigns launched by the state during that time was very effective, because you can see people were very happy there, smiling. But in actual fact, it may not be the case. But in the case, it may not be the case, but these are all propaganda. Yeah, the propaganda out there, they were promoting this marriage law, and that glorifies the initiative. So, which is good. But of course, there are tears and sad stories, which we will mention in a little while. So what we need to say is the problems. Let me just get the bar down here. So there are problems with this marriage law. And what was the problem? The law ended up to be a divorce law. Many people escaped unhappy marriages, especially women. So you could see the divorce rate just hiked right after the implementation of the marriage law. And the husbands' families felt they paid for their wives and were being stripped of hard-earned assets. So women, they were considered, there were some of the families, they really end up buying wives, actually. And then with the law, the women, they wanted to go away from the unhappy marriage. And so the husband's families felt that really that they lost. That's a loss to them. So they were not really happy. It's a lose of money at the same time. It's a financial loss. Yeah. And especially mother-in-laws within the family, they felt that really strong, and they were really strongly resist and reject the women's endeavor to leave their husbands, which means their sons' wives, right? And the elderly, they felt really disrespected because they used to be the most powerful person within the household, and now their status is getting changed. It's getting weaker and weaker because of the law. The women, especially, they acquired that consciousness of having equal rights to men, and they're using this law as a weapon. So the elderly folk, they felt really disrespected. They're losing that power, and at the same time, because the divorce rate were rising, and it threatened the social stability. And the political cadres in local areas, they were sided with men and elders against the young women. So in cases when young women wanted to get out of their unhappy marriages, usually the powerful cadres in the local areas, they form strong, especially those who have already formed strong networks with males. They would help their male buddies to stop the women from going away. Yeah. So in practice, it created such a huge problem for a lot of women who wanted to get rid of those constraints. And marriage law implementation threatened the participation. In Korean War, so soldiers were guaranteed their wives on return if they went to war. So as you can see, Korean War was that time, and a lot of soldiers, they went to war, and as they were having wives, that they did not want to lose their wives when they get back, but at the same time, their wives wanted to go. In this situation, the law just gave exceptions to those soldiers, allowing them a guarantee they could have a wife when they return to China. So this is, kind of unfair as well, right? Especially to a lot of women who want to, finish that marriage with their men, especially they can't really see their husbands during the Korean War. And too quick. The other one is moving on to the 1960s and the 1970s. That is during the Cultural Revolution period. And in this period, we know this is a very unique period in China that emphasizes political ideology and class struggle. So class struggle almost dominated everyday life during the Cultural Revolution, and the politics played a very important role in social and family life during this period. So political correctness and class struggle became the main ideology during this 10 years period. And many women during that time were little red guards, very radical, called Hongweibing, participating in these revolutionary campaigns, like attacking the bad class, eradicating the four old, etc. So that time, there were a lot of political movements, and women had no big difference to men in terms of physical difference, and you can tell from that picture. I can hear somebody's talking. If you could mute your mic, that would be great. Yeah. And during the Cultural Revolution, women had no big difference to men in terms of physical appearance, and their behaviors, their languages, very, seeing from today's perspective, very masculine, and there is no real, gender difference between men and women during that time. As, you can argue, this is really a form of gender gender equality. But at the same time, you can see women are losing their femininity. So femininity is kind of suppressed due to this political movements and political identities and ideologies that mandated during that special period. And many women, they made substantial gains during that time. They work in industries. They developing themselves as political leaders. They really, some women really excelled during that time because of, gender equality, because there's no difference between men and women. And that really challenged the idea of women's inferiority in society. So from that perspective, women really, were quite equal to males. And class endogamy was a feature during that time. And peasants, that time, if we're talking about marriage, peasants, they tend to marry peasants, and the bad class here referred to the landlords, rich peasants, the bad class, the so-called bad class. They found it really hard to find a partner. Yeah, and maybe the people needed to adhere to the hidden guidelines, which is to do the right thing, and which means politically correct. So many of them, they choose to marry CCP members and the so-called good family class origin, yeah, which means poor peasants and grassroots workers and soldiers. Whereas for the bad class, like rich landlords and landlords and rich peasants, and also those so-called capitalists, nobody wanted to marry them. And people had overseas network. They found it really difficult to get a partner. And in order to enhance one's political status, that time people needed to marry down, the so-called marry down to someone of lower social economic status. So in this situation, if you choose to marry down, you probably will, be promoted in the Communist Party, and you probably will get other kind of, benefits, and people would say, you are doing the politically correct thing. So that's how people orient their marriage during that time. And that time, people were heavily influenced by this leftist ideology, and that's why the overseas thing was considered bad. If you remember, it's only when China opened up, and then Deng Xiaoping started to say, okay, overseas network is a good thing. Overseas 海外关系是个好东西. As ever since that time, things started to shift. But before then, during the Cultural Revolution,
may I please just order the big breakfast with poached eggs and a
somebody talking,
fat white?
and if you could mute your mic, that would be very helpful. Okay. And or else I'll have to find a way to whoever who is talking. Okay. All right, let's continue. So as said, people were very heavily influenced by leftist ideology during the Cultural Revolution. So whoever has overseas network found it very difficult to find a partner. And many married people, they did not, many married people, although they had their wives, their partners, their husbands, if they found it as politically incorrect, they would divorce that person, and they would keep a distance. So it's not unusual that you hear that even between husband and wives and daughters or sons with their parents, they kept a distance, and that's all because politics really divided them up during that time, and the people wanted to escape from political predicament. They had to choose to separate from their partners, etc. And during that time, dating means marriage. So dating after marriage was very common. So you get married first, and then you start to date. Unless we are, doing today, people date first and then they get married. The other way around. And very special during the Cultural Revolution. And here I note endogamy, is the practice of marrying within a specific social group, caste or ethnic groups. So class endogamy, this is the definition, which means peasants marry peasants, soldiers marry soldiers, or, people marrying those who come from the same class during the Cultural Revolution, but they didn't marry across this class hierarchy. They don't cross that. This is a key feature of marriage during the Cultural Revolution. And the other thing we need to know is the 1980 marriage law. And this law is an update of the 1950 marriage law. The purpose of having that law was to promote China's economic development, because China started to open up from 1979. China's opening up and economic reform policy was implemented. So the society started to shift. The whole ideology started to shift. And the government wanted to promote China's economic development. So economic development was the priority, the key during that time. The government wanted to improve the living standards and modernization of China, and to prevent the massive population growth, because during the Cultural Revolution and during Mao's period, one family could have a lot of children, and there's no really family planning policy in place, and this really placed a burden on the economy, and how to solve that problem. And the new government thought, okay, we're going to have come up with some new framework like the marriage law and family planning policy, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, to as a way to strengthen China's economy. And some of the amendments from the 1950 marriage law was the legal marriage increased from for women increased from 18 years of age to 20. Men increased from 20 to 22. So marriage age was postponed. And you could compare that with those legal marriage age other countries. That would be very interesting. You will see in China, this age was actually pretty late in comparison with a lot of other countries. And the couples were encouraged to practice family planning policy. This is the clause in this law. So this family planning policy was called the one-child policy, 独生子女政策, in 1979. And that, so in 1980, it started to emphasize the importance of practicing the one-child policy. And in terms of divorce, the law said a divorce should be guaranteed on the grounds of breakdown of mutual affection and failed attempts of mediation. So breakdown of mutual affection means 感情破裂 in Chinese. So and you can see emotion here played an increasingly important role here in shaping the government's decisions in terms of regulating divorce and marriage. And this never happened prior. It's only from 1980 things started to shift, and things started to, continue to shift. In 2001, the marriage law was updated again, revised the 1980 law, and this law further clarified the conditions for obtaining a divorce. This law also prohibited domestic violence. People perhaps, they were not aware what was domestic violence, but in 2001, they started to learn from the law. But that is not to say everybody understood what is actually a domestic violence and they knew how to protect themselves. No, it's not the case. But still, it's a progress, as you could see, because that mentioned the term domestic violence. And this law also banned extramarital affairs and bigamy. And you can argue extramarital affairs and bigamy or deception. These were a byproduct of China's opening up and an economic reform. As prior in the Cultural Revolution, in that political climate, people, they did not do the so-called the wrong things. If they did, then that would be very hidden underground. But since China opened up, people, started to be more open, and they were, less regulating their behaviors to conform to the political ideology. As the whole climate changed, those were some of the ramifications, right? So that's not a surprise when you see those, and not surprised to see the government attempted to address these issues in this 2001 marriage law. And some other additional clauses include conditions for void and voidable marriage and possession of matrimony property, etc., and taking care of the elderly. It's very interesting that you see in the Chinese law, the government mandate this, saying children have the responsibility to take care of the elderly. But you never see this in other countries' laws. I'll highlight this: taking care of the elderly. And this is indeed, this is rooted in the Chinese culture, filial piety, etc., Confucianism, etc. And this is the right thing. I actually, quite like this. But this is just very unique. You don't see that in other cultures, other laws in other countries. And the law, and you can see some other clauses, conditions were written in this law. This is another progress. And that also, by eradicating some of these extramarital affairs, bigamy, etc., that's also a way to promote gender equality. Yeah, and so these are all merits. Wait. Okay, my eraser. So here was this one. This is some figures that you could see. This is the figure from the Ministry of Civil Affairs. How you could see how the divorce rate changed. This is from the early 2000, and then in 2016, this is how divorce grew, and it just rocked very fast. And here is in 2012. Let me just get my pen again. In 2012, you can see the divorce rate, which is the blue line, surpassed marriage rate. So you can tell in China the divorce rate, it's hiking so fast, and it exceeded that of the marriage 2012. That is amazing. And what we know now is divorce rate is pretty high in Western countries, but in China you can see that trend is catching up so fast, really quick. And but whereas for marriage rate, interesting, it's getting down. It's heading to a downward trend. Why is that? Right? Let me ask people why the marriage rate is getting down at the same time when divorce rate is hiking. Anybody wants to respond to that? Maybe, worth thinking. As we mentioned earlier, the marriage, age, the marriage age for people were postponed, right? And that could be one reason that shaped the demographics. And other reasons could be women's increased educational level. As women are receiving higher education and they wanted to spend more time working and training themselves, build their professional skills, they keep postponing their marriage. And that's why you see a lot of leftover women there. And plus, a lot of men wanted to look for women with less, educational level, and somebody they could, manage or control. And they found it really difficult because women are getting stronger and stronger. And at the same time, because of the one-child, policy, there are a lot of men out there, single males. That's partly due to the son preference culture, and that created a very, skewed figure there in the marriage market, which is called a male marriage squeeze. So that's partly explain why a lot of women couldn't find the right partner in the marriage market, and then that kind of affected the whole the marriage rate started to heading down. So that's just part of the reason. We'll cover that later. And moving on to the 2018 marriage law. That's pretty recent, just 2 years ago, right? So this is another update in response to the high divorce rate, because the government noticed, okay, China's divorce rate kept rising. What should we do? Yeah, we should keep updating the marriage law, and we should stop this trend. If you can imagine, if divorce rate is rising really quick, it's raising, right? And then that will cause instabilities. So the government do not like that. So they wanted to further clarify the conditions for divorce. They want to put some conditions there. They don't want people to divorce freely, as easily as they want to. They want them to consider carefully and make rational decisions before they get divorced. So they included some of the clauses and conditions, which makes divorce getting harder. Yeah. So this is the 2018 updates. And a new update here we need to know is the Minfadian Civil Code. This is a milestone in the development of China's legal system, I want you to know. Currently, the Civil Code is not in place yet. Let me get my eraser, so it's pretty messy, my notes. So currently, it's not in place yet, but it's going to take effect on the 1st of January 2021. That is next year. The NPC passed this civil code in May this year. So just wait and see. From 1st of January next year, we'll see the birth of the civil code. So why the government wanted to, enact this, wanted to implement this Minfadian? They wanted to replace they want to combine and replace the existing civil laws. There is different laws there, civil laws, and then also the marriage law. So which means the marriage law will not exist, but will be replaced by the civil code by then. Yeah, and another interesting of the civil code is that the government introduced something called a 离婚冷静期, a 30-day cooling off period for divorce to encourage couples to reconsider their divorce. So as you can see, this is another initiative by the government wanting people not to divorce as easily as they want to. They want them to calm down and think and then make a decision. But this is not to say the government is prohibiting people to divorce. No, they just want people to think carefully before making a decision. Yeah, this is another way to tackle the hiking divorce rate in China. But this one, as you can see, definitely this clause stirred an open discussion and debate online over this online, because this is you can see, from a critical point of view, this is a state is interfering in people's private relationships, and that also raised concerns about the protection of women's rights. Yeah, if women wanted to get divorced, but they can't, and they have to wait to cool off, and there's 30-day. What if there are domestic violence, and women are usually the victims of domestic violence? What should they do? Are they be marginalized, etc.? Yeah, but luckily a lot of people's concern were actually addressed, because for those who were in a domestic violence during that time, this cooling off period for divorce would not apply. Yeah, so that's good. But there are some other concerns that people raised online. But anyhow, this is a milestone in China's legal framework. Yeah, and the other thing we need to know. Oh, there's a quiz. Let's do a quiz quickly. So, which marriage law made breakdown of mutual affections 感情破裂 as grounds for divorce? Just circle that. You can annotate the slide. Remember. Good. 1980 marriage law. Yeah, you're right. Good. Yeah. And I can tell people didn't select others. That means you were right. Yeah. And moving on. Let me just change this. This is my eraser again. And it's not moving. Okay. Oh. And which marriage law set the minimum marriage age for women at 18 and men at 20? Let me get my eraser. Okay, women at 18, men at 20. Okay, you're correct. Purple, blue, you're right. And next. I get my eraser, it's not moving. Yeah. Oh, good. Thank you for erasing that. And which marriage law encouraged the couples to practice family planning first? Encouraged the couples to practice family planning. Think, family planning was when? Family planning started in 1979, so that would be 1980. Correct. Yeah, and I can see somebody also corrected your answer. Good. And next, let me get my eraser again to erase this part. Okay. And now let's have a look at China's family planning policy, the one-child policy and the two-child policy. And now let me give you a 5 minutes break, and we'll come back at 10:12. Yeah, come back at 10:12. Let's continue with the family planning policy. Do some stretches and have some water, and then come back. Yeah. Hi, let's continue. I hope you're there. Let me check. I hope you are there. So it's 10:12. Let's continue with China's family planning policy. We're going to look at one-child and two-child policy. Firstly, the one-child policy, it started from 1979 and ends in 2015. Yeah, and there are positives and there are negatives. Firstly, the purpose of having a one-child policy. What was that? The main purpose of having that policy was to curb China's population growth for economic prosperity. So economy first, economic growth first. As said, the main agenda of the CCP during the opening up period was to develop the economy. So they need to, slow down the growth of the population first. For that means each, household can only have one child. But that obligation only applies to the majority Han, not the minority groups or those in the rural areas, or some other cases, for example, families that have children with disability, taking into account those factors. And some positives around this policy is this policy changed women's lives because that reduced maternal mortality. Women's fertility dropped. That also reduced the maternal mortality rate, and that's a good thing. So women also, they could spend less time taking care of their children. They can spend less time doing the housework and the chores, etc. They can spend more time outside home. They could socialize, and they could, do some things that they want to do and build up their professional skills instead of being bound up inside the family. And they could negotiate more equitable marital relationship in comparison with the previous generation of women. Yeah. So basically, you could see these are all positives around the one-child policy. And you can argue this is a new sex model created by the CCP and bring a lot of benefits, especially to women. And also at the same time, I think probably didn't mention is although boys are preferred, by most families that we know, some preference is pretty strong in China, but many started to reevaluate girls. And many families started to reinvest in girls and their daughters, both financially and emotionally, because they only have one child. So everything should be centered on that child, regardless of his or her or their genders. So it can be argued that girls gained chances for, gained a lot of chances because and increased their life chances in a way because of the policy. And let me click on that. But as said, there are negative effects because of the policy. In rural China, for example, this policy led to strong resistance from peasants. Why? Because during the opening up period, China was also having this household responsibility system in place in rural China. 家庭联产承包责任制. So with that system there, peasant income really depend on the number of workers in the family. So families, they need labor, physical labor. So that means rural households will have to keep bearing children until they get a son, because son will contribute more physically to labor work in comparison with girls. Yeah, and so that way the family will be more, affluent, because they will gain more, because the boys will do more economic contribution. Then that's why they prefer men, primary reason. And so in practice, the policy implemented by the local family planning committee. Oh, it says my internet connection is not very stable, and I hope I won't drop out. But if I drop out, I'll come back. Okay. So the local family planning committee, they were having that duty to make sure everybody was following the one-child family. So whoever had the first child, they get a certificate with entitlements to privileges. So everybody's happy, whoever followed the rule. But for those who, have, had a second child, women will have to go through sterilization. It's always, it's some challenge that's not good for women. And if families that they had unapproved pregnancies, the solution was to, the solution to unapproved pregnancies is abortion. Yeah, so abortion is another thing mandated. They had to go through this painful process to follow the policy. I have some materials here. So increased sex selective abortion is one product of the one-child policy. And because people wanted sons, right, especially in rural areas, a lot of girls, they get abandoned. And many of the girls were not registered, right? If you don't register the girl, then you can keep having a son, right? So a lot of girls end up not being registered. So that's the so-called the missing girls. So when we're talking about the missing girls, they're either being killed, abandoned, or they're being unregistered, right? And so you've heard the term female and infanticide. Let me just click on that. We can watch the video for a little while. What is the so-called the missing girls? Yeah, that is a big thing in China, and that's the main reason that China get a very skewed.
We're here with Ewan McGregor. I've been dreaming of a trip through South America.
But there is
I really enjoy the unknown of it all.
More,
it's an adventure.
Unfortunate number of women. Why is that? Here shows some of the reasons. Can you hear the sound? Can you hear the sound that when I play the video?
I'm Lisa Ling, and one of my
somebody. Can you tell me if you could hear that?
Favorite shows for Explorer was called China's
Yes.
Yes, good. Thank you. Yeah.
Lost Girls.
My mom said that I was born in someone else's stomach and that my biological mom couldn't take care of me, so she put me in an orphanage so I could have a better life. I was born in China and I was brought here. If it wasn't for my mom and dad, I bet I'd still be in the orphan.
Television cameras ever allowed into China to shoot at an orphanage. We followed American couples over to China to adopt their Chinese baby girls. The anxiousness was so palpable the day that these couples were going to adopt their little girls. They were so nervous. They'd been waiting for more than a year to finally meet the new addition to their family. People who work at the orphanage started to bring the baby girls into the room. It was the most incredible scene. These little girls had looks of terror. They were so scared about what was happening. They were crying, and it was chaotic, and all the parents started crying. And when the parents took these little babies into their arms, it was so moving because these little girls had been abandoned by their parents, and on that day, they were enveloped into the arms. As I stood in that room, it was like everyone was going through labor at the same time. It was a beautiful thing.
So this is the video that shows us, you know, who are the missing girls and why they were missing, and where, you know, they end up, who they end up with. Yeah, so a lot of them end up being adopted by foreigners. Yeah. So how skewed China's gender ratio is in 1989. That when you have 100 girls, you have 105 boys. In 2000s, the new millennium is getting worse. When you have 100 girls, there were 120 boys at birth. And then in 2014, the figure started to change a little bit, but still not good. So it's 116 boys versus 100 girls. And in 2018, which is 2 years ago, it's, you know, kind of get back to the level of 1989 when you see 105 boys and you see 100 girls there. But it's still highly skewed, and you could see gender imbalance is a huge problem in China, and that also, you know, it's very concerning. Partly, you know, when we're talking about marriage, is that it created marriage squeeze. I kind of touched on that term. I'll explain. So that means single men were unable to find a wife in the local marriage market. So when you see there are around 30 to 40 million more men than women in, you know, at marriageable age, from 1980s to 2014, that means it's very difficult for them to find a wife. And this caused the male marriage squeeze. This is what we mean by that term. So again, that means men were disadvantaged in looking for a wife in the marriage market, as their numbers exceeds women. So many of them ended up being squeezed out of the market. So they had to be single. They had to stay single. And that's a big problem. And at the same time, and you could see there are other problems. If you see there are a lot of, you know, single men, especially in rural China, you can link to this week's theme of international bride trafficking. Part of the reason of bride trafficking is there are a lot of single men. They are, you know, creating this demand for foreign wives, and therefore you see a lot of women in Southeast Asia, like Myanmar, Thailand, the Philippines, and of course there are other countries as well. They were desperately wanted to get back to China and get married, and some of them they just wanted to come, you know, to go to China for better employment opportunities and to change their life. As China, you know, is developing so fast, all of these factors are intertwined and then drive that bride trafficking business. So gender here, gender racial imbalance, the gender racial plays a key role in enabling this kind of business. Of course, there are like other problems when you see this gendered, skewed gender racial in China, like violent crime rates, prostitution problems. You can imagine there are many problems are related. Okay, so this is about gender imbalance. And then also one thing worth mentioning is sex-selective abortion. Fortunately, it was banned in 1985. Because there were campaigns and slogans around in public spaces that really heightened girls' values. So, and you can see the government intervened in this regard as well. Like slogans here in public says 生男生生女生都一样，女儿也是传后人。So times have changed. The boys and girls are, equally good. It's the same when you have a boy and a girl, and daughters could also carry on the family line. Slogans like this in public venues, and says a daughter is as good as a son. Who says girls are worth less than boys? And boy or girl, let nature take its course. So these are all, propagandas, again, campaigns. Let's just put it, campaigns, not propaganda. Okay, campaigns launched by the government. Yeah, heightening the value of girls, which is important, and which was influential as well. That helped girls to, increase the value of girls to many families. And at the same time, the one-child generation also create problem. That problem is called the 4-to-1 problem. So the 4-to-1 problem means as the only child born in, especially born in 1980s when China had that one-child policy, they will have to take care of 4 retired parents and 1 child. And for the second generation, only child, they need to take care of both their parents and grandparents, especially for those who have no cousins, no uncles, no aunties. And then you can see this cartoon. This child had this parents, they had this parents on both sides. So the one-child generation will have to take care of both their parents, and also later their grandparents. So and they have no cousins, no brothers. They're the only child, so that plays a lot of pressure on them. And what's this one? We missed one chart here. This graph shows you the gender gap here. China's gender gulf in 100 millions. So in 1980s, and you can see the gap between men and women increased fast. And then in 2020, the gap is getting bigger. Yeah, but the statistics are different from other sources. The gap in some other sources are saying the gap has actually narrowed, but anyhow there is a gap there, and that is create the problem of gender imbalance. Yeah, now I'm going to show you a video on China's 4-to-1 problem. The second video here. One sec. It's getting slow. Okay. 1, 2. Come on. Okay. A little bit slow.
You take her off the package.
You're doing something this country will never forget.
She's not going to make it on the line. Let's get revenge on all of Tehran.
Very short.
From great-great-grandmother down through 5 generations, this family is a perfect example of China's population crisis. There's only one great-great-grandchild. It's a story of pain and loss that could be told at hundreds of millions of dinner tables. I did fall pregnant for a second time, Jiang Xinping tells me, but I had an abortion.
Did you have a choice?
I couldn't keep it, she replies. You either go willingly or the government comes for you. Rudong in eastern China was once given model status for its strict enforcement of the one-child policy. Now, though, in terms of age profile, it is the oldest place in the country.
With its early adoption and strict enforcement, the county of Rudong has been emptied of its children quicker than anywhere else in China. And as it grows old, it now stands as a stark warning about the disastrous economic consequences of the one-child policy. There have been changes. The number of exceptions to the rule have increased, but so far China's national leaders have stubbornly stuck to it.
China's population obsession can be traced back to Chairman Mao, becoming national policy after his death. But critics say even a two-child policy won't boost the birth rate enough. And for women who want more than two, of course, it won't end the brutal control of their fertility. John Sudworth, BBC News,
Okay,
Rudong.
so that's a short clip on China's one-child policy, the 4-to-1 problem created for the only child in the family. For me, I'm also the only child because I was born in the 1980s, and I'm facing, that problem as well. And now I would like us to do one thing, as we just talk about China's one-child policy and China's huge problem of gender imbalance. Now, please click on this link. I am going to click on this link, and are you able to click on the link via the screen sharing? Can you access that document?
Get through the Zoom.
Okay, great, thank you. And as you could access here, I can see you're editing that. Good. Our task now is that we are going to do a gender case study. This is like what you are going to do to use around 6 minutes talking about your gender case study in the tutorial later. So for this one, for example, we're going to do the topic on can polyandry solve China's serious gender imbalance? Yeah. Why is that? Because I saw the story. You can quickly read that story. I've already linked that story to our model site under this week's section. So the story basically is, if you can, quickly have a read, that's fine. Basically what happens is there is an economic professor at Shanghai's Fudan University who offered a proposal in June 2020. That was just 3 months ago, as an approach to solve China's gender imbalance. So the professor says, let's use polyandry as a way to solve China's gender imbalance problem. What is polyandry? That means to lead one woman to have multiple husbands. And this is not a joke. This is real. He meant that. He is a professor, and he basically, came up with that solution, if you call that, from the economic perspective. So what we do is we are going to tell that story first. We're going to give that a title called Can Polyandry Solve China's Serious Gender Imbalance? And we tell the story, what happened. That would just take about a minute or so, right? And then we start to analyze that gender case. I've completed part of this, and I want you to complete the rest of that all together for us as a team, and then I'm giving you feedback on the spot. So I'm starting with, why is that? Why is the professor raising such idea? As China has serious gender imbalance, men outnumber women on a massive scale. The sources says 34 million, there are 34 million more males than females, the equivalent of almost the entire population of California or Poland. So this part, as you can see, is not from that source. This is based on my research, the data I found elsewhere. And so that means 30 to 40 million missing women. So who are the missing women? They are either aborted or unregistered. And mainly due to the reasons. I'm explaining the reasons here. Number one, China's strong preference for boys. Second, China launched the one-child policy in 1979, and that exacerbated the problem. And number three, there are, there are technologies available, technology of ultrasound and sex-selective abortion that enabled a lot of families to only, to choose to have boys rather than girls. And that kind of devalued girls as well. So the gender gap made it very difficult for Chinese men to find wives, and that created the so-called male marriage squeeze, the term we just learned from today. So this has also increased the violent crimes and prostitution. At the same time, it filled the growing demand for trafficked women from abroad, especially Southeast Asia, based on this week's reading, especially Myanmar, the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, etc. And this is the story, and this is my analysis. I want you to show your opinions of the gender case study, and this part is something we are going to write together. Yeah, I would like us to spend, some time thinking first. I'm gonna put you in different breakout groups. You have a discussion, and then we're going to put your ideas here and complete this piece together. Yeah. And do you all understand the task? Do we all understand what we do? So our task is to complete the rest of the gender case analysis. And now let me just see if I could put you to different breakout groups, and then you could discuss the pros and cons of the professor's proposal of using polyandry as a solution to China's gender imbalance problem. And then perhaps also include your solutions. Yeah, so basically you discuss the pros and cons, and then we write them down together. Let me just put you to different groups. And I think it would be helpful if you could turn on your camera and talk to each other. Yeah. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and then we'll come back at 10:45. Yeah. Do you have any questions for me before I put you into different groups?
Yes. Actually, I can get this link. Can you share the link for us?
Sure. Yeah. So let me share with you chat box, right? Where is the chat box? Hold on, I'm gonna just
Thank you so much.
The chat box. Somebody tell me where is the chat box? Okay.
I already sent the link.
Did you get the link?
I already sent the link in the chat.
Oh, good. Thank you. Who has done that, thanks very much. I'm just looking for the chat box. Can't find it. Okay, so everybody gets that link. Everybody has got that link already, right? And yes, that means yes. Okay. Are there any further questions before I put you into different groups? Nope. Okay, so we're fine. Now, let me just go back to put you in different groups. So we have 62 people, around maybe 6 people. So 10 or 11 groups, that will do. Let's do it. And 6 people per group. Yeah. Or we could do less. We could do less people. 4 to 5 people. Okay. Done. Okay, we're back. We're back to the main room. Let me have a look at how we did and how we're going here. So as you can all see the document, let's do it together. And you can continue typing up if you like. Let's see what we've got so far. So if we were to evaluate the professor's proposal in your opinion, the pros include, it says, it will increase the chances, okay, let's put it that way, by letting one woman have multiple husbands will increase the chances of females choosing a mate and improve the family status of women. Feel free to respond to people's answers here, as that's all anonymous, that's all fine, you know, and we can always correct it if you think that's, you know, needs to be further addressed. So increase the chances of females choosing a mate. Indeed, as one woman would have multiple choices, right, to choose a man, whereas men perhaps get very, you know, little choice to choose a woman, and improve the family status of women. So imagine a family. There is one woman and multiple husbands, and perhaps all the husbands will, I understand what you meant. Well, you know, all activities will be centered on the women. So therefore, you think the family status of women will be increased. But I would say, what about, you know, what if women would, you know, fall into reproductive machines? If women have all, you know, have children with all their husbands, will their family status be improved or, you know, been challenged? As the woman potentially will take care of at least 5 children and do all the houseworks for their husbands. And so this part, I'm not sure. Yeah. And it would be interesting to learn what other people, you know, are thinking. Let me see if I can get any color here. I think I should be able to get any color. Yeah, so this part. Assurances of fertility. Pros, assurances of fertility. Okay, because women fall into, you know, reproductive machines. So I know what you mean. Yeah, so a woman would have children. So China will have, you know, abundant children there. And parental care for children. What do you mean, parental care for children? The pros. Not sure. Yeah, feel free to respond at any time. Okay, reduces the need of funding wives from other countries. Trafficking, that's correct. This may perhaps will work to a certain degree. Reduces the average working age population. Address the growing 4-to-1 problem. Address the growing 4-to-1 problem. Perhaps it will, yeah. Reduce the average working age population. Reduce the average working age population. What does that mean? Can you further explain? How does that work? Whoever wrote that?
So basically, if there's more children, there would be more people in the workforce essentially in the future. So because the issue now is that there aren't enough children to support the parents and the grandparents, if they essentially, although there's a lot of social issues, use women as a child-rearing machine almost, you would get more of a working age population, which would help the economy grow in the long term.
Okay, yeah. Reduce the average working age population. Perhaps. Okay, yeah, I'll keep thinking on that. Thanks very much, Michelle. And let's have a look at the cons. Okay, I can still see people typing. One of the other pros is to increase genetic diversity. Wow, increase genetic diversity. Okay. Interesting. And for cons, realistically, a short-term solution, yeah, it it's short-sighted. I would argue that as well. And for children, we'll have multiple parents to take care of in the future. Exactly. So you can see, as people see here, somebody saying here, address the growing 4-to-1 problem, probably in the short term. But here it says we'll have multiple parents to take care of in the future. You see, here is a contradiction, but I kind of more agree with this one as a the cons. As a child, indeed, will have multiple parents to take care of. However, if you have multiple children, yeah, then they probably can share that burden. Then in that case, that will help to, kind of shoulder the pressure of this 4-to-1 problem. Yeah, so two sides to consider. And more pressure placed on women, more childbearing, indeed. That's a lot of housework for women. So not only just doubled or tripled the burden of women, but quadrupled, even more. And, at the moment, like some women in the developing countries, for example, in some island countries, women will, or like say in India, women actually work 14 times that of their male counterparts inside the family, in many families at the moment. Yeah, especially given in some of the countries, in Asian countries, a lot of countries in Asia, when, adults, elder parents are living together, they will have to all take care of them and children as well. So you can imagine how much work women are shouldering. And at this point, globally, women do 2.5 times as much unpaid care and domestic labor as men, correct? More unfair work for women, yes. Also, how would it work with having children? One woman with a 9-month gestation period, okay, and multiple husbands, yeah, unbelievable. And then one woman to care for all children, extremely unfair. More needs to be done to address the social cultural issue. Exactly, this is a cultural problem. This is a social problem. This is not just a one family's problem, not just a family problem, social problem that have led to such an issue, such as prevailing traditional gender roles, or why indeed that will reinforce women's traditional gender roles, or why the percentage of infidelity in males is so large. Okay, and I'm not very sure why the percentage of infidelity in males is so large. Okay, basically the argument is saying women are taking a lot of work that is unfair, right? So here, rather than just to change the marriage law, okay. I can hear people talking again. If you want to talk to us, that would be great. But I assume you're talking over the phone or to somebody else. Mute your mic. Okay. All right. And let's continue. It says more husbands mean that women need to do more care work in the family. Yeah. That's the same opinion. Each husband want their own child, but wife don't have that much energy to give birth and raise too much baby. Okay, fundamentally the weak problem, incomplete, contradictory, complex of a gender imbalance in China is a consequence of state intervention. The social engineer, yes, this person has certainly done the reading. Thank you. And the enforcement of the professor's attempt will only be another example of state intervention in private good point, and with far-reaching consequences. For example, how is a system regulated? Exactly, this is a bigger problem than what we can imagine. When women have their rights taken away in order to become childbearing machines, what of other children caught between divorces of a polyandry couple, what if a children caught between, yeah, and what if children with a 34 million imbalance, there will be immense pressure on women to comply, how to protect the rights. Exactly, that raises a lot of problem, not only just the legal problem, but a lot of others that you can imagine. And emphasize of what is this? Emphasize of party to social stability. A multiple partner relationship contradicts 70 years of policy favoring monogamy as the morally superior option. Yeah, so that's impossible, right, to implement, I think. And building on that, social cultural issues would arise from the breakdown of family units. Here, issues with divorce, division, family assets, this will become a real problem later for the state to solve. And the state, if the state were to agree with the professor, then there are a lot of problems will be created for the state itself. It is not very fair. If women can have multiple husbands, men should be able to have multiple wives. Okay, this person is thinking from the perspective of gender equality, right? Women can have multiple, but why can't men, right? Gender should be equal, right? Yeah. The problem is there is no women. The problem is there's there's very little women, right? Yeah, so the men in China currently are already struggling, and if many men couldn't even possibly find one wife, and how can they possibly have multiple wives, right? Yeah, and though it can solve the problem of gender imbalance, it can lead to inequality. Good, as men are not allowed to have multiple wives, it promotes infidelity. Yes, exactly. This is another problem. Infidelity could be created, and that will increase the violent rate and the prostitution problem, because prostitution is not legal in China. It is legal here and in many other countries, like in the US, but not in China. Yeah, so that is a problem. And some women capitalists, rich women have advantage to pick good men, which is unfair. Okay, yeah, very interesting point. Yeah, there's a class concept here. Women, there's a hierarchy. Yes, women, like elite women, rich women, they may have more choices rather than the lower and middle class women. If yeah, it could be. My solution to there's another sentence here come in. The same for men. Okay, yeah. Perhaps for men they will be marginalized in this hierarchical selection process. And here, my solution to China's gender imbalance is a proposal from the reading. Okay, allow for the legal and regulated migration of women who do wish to flee developing countries in order to seek a better life through marriage. Allow them. Currently, the women, they do have the freedom. They do have the freedom to migrate. Yeah, and so you don't have to say allow for it, because they could. Yeah, and for negatives, here it says change ethnic fabric of China. Foreigners, okay, do you mean to getting more foreigners coming to China? It could be one solution, but that, as we said, will cause the problem of international bride trafficking. How will you solve that problem, right? What to do with divorce and citizenship? Yeah, and how to police that. Exactly, how do you police this? For trafficked brides, especially to China. And we need more regulations and cooperations there, but between governments to solve this a big problem. And here seems to exploit desperate women. Yeah, it is a form of exploitation, but remember, many of the women, they go to China voluntarily, and they're also using marriage as a ladder to climb up, as a stepstone to climb up the social ladder to improve their life chances and to escape poverty, etc. So they're actually, you know, mutually beneficial in that regard. But anyhow, it's with a lot of problems, including exploitation. So pros can have potential to make up the 30 million. Sure, yeah. So use that term we just learned. Potentially, when you mentioned the pros, that can solve the problem of male marriage squeeze. Remember that term, male marriage squeeze. Perhaps, say, in a couple of years, in 5 years or so, the problem will be solved. However, it is anyhow short-sighted, given those problems, etc. As we constructed these answers together. I think you've done well. We kind of touched on this point, and also you've mentioned things about gender inequality, because when you mentioned the cons, it does indeed enhance gender inequality. We have to highlight that part. Not only just women shoulder more labor work, but a lot of other issues, real gender issues there, and the bigger issues, structural problems, not just the legal, but on a broader scale. Yeah, good. So in the very end, you can have 1 or 2 questions for the class. Okay, the person says, so is there just a no solution? Okay, so what about your solution? Things like that. So this is like a demo for us to do the gender case study. I hope you have a better idea what we're looking for and what you should be doing, right? So as you could see, we start with a very small case. The thing that I read from here, the source here, basically saying, this is an opinion raised by a professor. And then we analyze we analyze China's gender imbalance problem. So through this story, we analyze China's gender imbalance issue, and then we further evaluate the pros and cons of the professor's proposal before we raise one question to the class, whichever question you want to put. Yeah, anybody gets any further questions about the gender case study or this case in particular? I hope this, co-construction of knowledge, this approach can help you to better understand the task, and will help people to have a better idea of, how to prepare for this task. Yeah, and the task just need, say, 6 to 7 minutes for each person. If that's for pairs, that's 10 minutes excluding discussion time. We want some discussion time, but not too long, as we have a big number of participants, presentations per class. But for each presentation, I want you to learn from it. I want everybody to get involved in this discussion. Okay, are there any questions about that? Okay, if there's no further questions, let's continue. Let me share my screen with you. I should close this document, and you can always revisit the document when you need. It's all open for editing. And now let me just get back to my slide. Okay, back to the slide and then continue. Okay, now let's have a look at China's two-child policy. We have talked about China's one-child policy just now, and now this is China's two-child policy. Why was Chinese government wanted to, have a two-child policy? Why the government couldn't continue the one-child policy? Because the government noticed that there were some problem with the one-child policy, which was aging. It was one problem, and then at the same time, shrinking workforce is another problem. So in response to the 4-to-1 problem, especially, the government is thinking we are going to let couples to have 2 children if, oh dear, if we are going to have one family to have two children, if both parents were the only children themselves. That thought was in 2009, and after 4 years, the government thought, okay, we're going to relax the policy further. We're going to have families to have two children if one of the parents is the only child. Yeah, so the policy was further relaxed in 2013. And in 2016, all couples were allowed to have up to two children, no matter they are the only child or not. Yeah, so however, ethnic minorities, they were following different rules. That means they could have more than two children. For families that have children with a disability, they can still have more. So this only applies to the majority Han population. So here is one video. We could watch that together. CCTV's two-child policy.
China's two-child policy came into effect this year, but as CCTV's Wang Wei tells us, for many Chinese women, raising more than one child means more effort, which can impact their career development.
Managing career and family life balance is now the only challenge for most Chinese women now.
Remember when we're doing the gender case study, I haven't read people mention about women's career choices, career development. Yeah, as having a lot of children, what does that mean to women's, career? That means women will not have career, and then they're perhaps, very likely to be independent economically, depending on men. So that creates a huge gender inequality there. Yeah.
When they choose to bear a second child, they will need a longer maternity leave and possibly more time to spend with their family. The National Health and Family Planning Commission says women are likely to face employment difficulties and workplace prejudice. This is a situation that happens not only in China, but also in other countries as well, as an Australian journalist tells us.
There's definitely prejudice against women in Australia and in Western countries because of the employers' ideas that women around my age, around the age of 20s and in the 30s, might go off and have children and leave that employer without a worker. And I think that more needs to be done to make the employers see women as valuable workers.
A participant from the Committee of the Care of the Next Generation, an NGO focusing on children's rights, believes the entire society should act to help women.
Women should be strong and independent, but we should also know the entire society should shoulder the responsibility of human reproduction, not just the women do.
During this year's two sessions, the director of the National Health and Family Planning Commission has addressed women's plights, saying the government will build more breastfeeding centers and other medical facilities for pregnant women. These measures are expected to ease the effects of the two-child policy on women. Wang Hui.
Okay, so that's this one, and let me close that one. And here are two more videos. I think you could watch that after class. Yeah, and for now, I would like people just to have a think, which population policy works better for China in the long term, whether that is one-child policy or two-child policy, or perhaps none of those. It could be more, maybe polyandry, etc. So just, have a think about that later. And now I would like to give you another 5 minutes break, and then we'll move on to the second part, the concept of mobility. So we'll come back at 11:20. Yeah, so let's continue at 11:20. Should we continue? Let's continue. Now, I hope everybody is there. Come back. So now we're talking about the concept of mobility. And here, when we talk about mobility, we are talking about mobility from the sociological point of view. So what is that? Mobility means the movement of people between or within a social hierarchy. You can see this triangle it symbolizes a social hierarchy. So it's the movement of a person or persons from one social status to another. So for social status, here it refers to a mixture of things that include somebody's wealth, their income, residence, their years of education, their quality of education, their health, their longevity, their religion, their ethnicity, or any political factors. I mean, all of these determine how a society is stratified. So that is social status. It's a mixture of things that determines one's social status. So for social status, it can be upward, it could be downward, it could be vertical, or it could be horizontal, different forms of mobility. So for movement up or down the social hierarchy is called vertical. So either go up or either go down. That's a form of vertical mobility. And for movement between two equally ranked social positions, that is horizontal mobility. Yeah, so now we understand this one. And let me give you one example. Let's say when we talk about upward or downward. And so if you think Bill Clinton, do we know Bill Clinton? Yeah, the former US president. So his ascendance from being a small town boy to the US president is an example of upward mobility, because you see, he used to be a grassroots, and then he became the president of the United States. And also from Obama as well, right, for a lot of other people. And if you think about the former president, Taiwanese president Chen Shui-bian, whose fall from being a rich and powerful politician to a prison inmate, and that is a form of downward mobility. Yeah, and you can think about more examples. I'm pretty sure people now understand what I mean of going upward or downward of the social ladder. So if we apply that to marriage, upward mobility, that means hypergamy. There's a term. Hypergamy means marry up. That's a form of vertical mobility, going upward. For example, someone from a lower social economic status marry someone from higher social economic status. That means that's a form of hypergamy. Yeah, and I think currently what's running in my head is one example. There is one lady, I think, who used to be an international student coming from China, and then who stayed in Australia, and then by chance she met a prince from Denmark, I think. Yeah, Margaret, right? She met a prince from Denmark, and then they get married, and that's a form of upward mobility for that woman. Yeah, from an international student to the princess of Denmark. And for downward mobility, that is called a hypogamy. That means marry down. That's a form of vertical mobility as well. Yeah. And for horizontal mobility, that just means parallel movement. Like I used to be a lecturer at UTS, and now I'm teaching at UNSW. So you can see the change of myself. This is kind of horizontal movement. So that is all parallel movement. That's called horizontal mobility. And so that's that. And there are also other terms called intragenerational mobility and intergenerational mobility. So for intragenerational mobility, that means a person's social movement within his or her lifespan. For example, say, that's just hypothetically, I was born in a small village in China, and then I obtained a university degree at UTS, and then I progressed to a writer and university lecturer. So that is, the things that changed within my own lifespan. That is intragenerational mobility. And but for intergenerational mobility is the changes in social status between different generations within the same family. So, for example, my grandparents had high school degree, and my parents they had college degree, and for me, I had a doctorate and achieved, in comparison with my grandparents and my parents, I achieved the highest social status, you can say. So that's the changes within different generations in my family line. So that is a form of intergenerational mobility. I think I've explained that clearly to you. If not, here is a video we can watch together, just quickly to further get familiar.
Hello, I want you to meet this wonderful family. It's Mary, the mum, Jim, the dad, and Ian, the son. And they're going to help us to understand some key concepts about social mobility. Now, Ian is an accountant, so he will be considered middle class. And if this triangle represents the upper class at the top, middle class in the middle, and lower class at the bottom, he would typically be considered as an accountant to be in the middle class. So what would happen if in Ian's lifetime he got a series of promotions and ended up as the CEO of this international accounting firm, ended up making an absolute boatload of money, and actually joined the upper class? He would actually move up in terms of his social standing. What about on the flip side? What if he had some real struggles at the company, got fired, and ended up in a really poorly paid job, maybe in a manual job, maybe as a factory worker? He would perhaps move down. In his lifetime, he would perhaps join the working class or the lower class. So one of the important things to consider here is what's happening to Ian. It's happening to him in his lifetime, in his own lifetime. Whether he goes up or down, this change in social mobility that he's experiencing is one that it's affecting him in his own generation, in his own lifetime. And this is something that we call intragenerational mobility. And the important thing with intragenerational mobility is that it's affecting Ian in his lifetime. Now, there's another concept I want to introduce you to, and that concept is a little bit different. And that concept is actually called intergenerational mobility. And just like intragenerational mobility, these concepts are both really describing types of social mobility, particularly social mobility up or down the social hierarchy. Now, what's different about intergenerational mobility is that we really need to consider Ian's parents, because intergenerational mobility actually considers them in addition to him. Instead of just looking at what is happening to him, we have to really consider where they stand on the social ladder. So let's have a look at them. So if they were manual workers, laborers, working class or lower class, and then Ian ended up being a CEO, for example, in the upper class, we would see that across generations, there was a change in their social group from a lower class to upper class. So really, one of the key concepts between both of these is that when we consider intragenerational mobility, we are considering social mobility change in a person's own lifetime, while when we consider intergenerational mobility, we are considering social mobility changes across generations.
Okay, so we're clear about some of these terms. Oh, I sort of close this. Let me close this and get back to my slide here. Okay, so we're familiar with some of these types of mobilities, but also understand there are different factors influence a person's social mobility. And these factors would include different forms of capitals a person acquire. These forms of capitals, just to, get to understand, that concept is raised by the French theorist called Pierre Bourdieu, Bourdieu's theory, who says there are different forms of capitals, for example, economic, social, cultural, human, symbolic capitals. If you see this slide, what are, each one includes, like human capitals could include one's creativity, wisdom, judgment, experience, and for social capitals include one's values, citizen power, one's networks, etc., and of course financial capital and cultural capital, like skills, knowledge, and symbolic capital, like one's reputation, honor, etc. All these capitals will shape one's social capital, will shape one's mobility. And also the value systems of societies also shape one's mobility. For example, a society could be either open or closed. That will determine, whether one could, the amount of wealth one could have, or the life opportunities one can have. And for example, in comparison, Australia is a more open society, whereas Afghanistan and Iraq and some of those countries like Yemen would be very closed. Yeah. So which country do you get more chances to improve to increase your mobility? Of course, Australia, right? And also for political factors as well. If you think about the Cultural Revolution period in China, then you have very little chances, especially for, in some patriarchal societies, it's very difficult for women to go up the ladder. And for religion purpose also, like for India's caste system, right? That will prohibit the lower class to move up the ladder. So it's less equal society. Less equal society means less gender equality and less opportunities for people to change their social status. So all of these factors are connected. Other factors, for example, luck. If you're lucky, then you probably get promoted. You probably get a better job. You're rich, or you inherit wealth from your parents, your family, etc., whereas others are not. So overall, mobility is shaped by different factors, different forms of capitals, the value systems of societies, and also internal and external factors. And the mobility is also a changing concept. It keeps changing. It's not static, right? So either, one could go up or go down. It's not always stays the same. Now let's have a think through what means can you achieve upward mobility. Let me give you a scenario. Imagine yourself as a young political or economic refugee from Afghanistan or Syria, and you came to Australia seeking for sheltering. You are at the bottom of the society and you want to, change this status. So through what means can you achieve upward mobility? Let me just, give you 1 minute to think. You could down our answers here on the board. Where's my whiteboard? Well, anyway, yeah, just write on here. That's good. Yeah, I saw somebody wrote marriage. Yes, good. Marriage could be one, right? And especially for women, it could be easier, you know, climbing up the social ladder through marriage, given that scenario. And migration. What do you mean migration? Migration is not a means that you could use to achieve upward mobility. So I'll place a question mark here. Keep thinking and write down your thoughts there. Color. Why migration? Education, good. Yeah. Education works, and marriage works. Here also education. Start a business. Start a business. Do you have money to start a business? You're a refugee, right? So this may not work, but that's possible. That's possible because if you can create your network, other people, you get help from others, and you start a business. In the long term, you may change your status. You may climb up the social ladder. Yeah. And what's this one? Increase skills. I can't really read this because this is all blue, right? Promotion. I'm asking about the means that you could achieve upward mobility. This is quite indirect, yeah. But as what people listed here, definitely that all worked. And just basically education, through university, you could receive more education, and then you form more network, and you accumulate more cultural and social capitals. And, perhaps you could marry somebody, and having the shortcut to improve your status. And you may also, join certain competitions to make yourself stand out, let other people know, to enlarge your chances. And for forming networks, etc., etc. So these are some of the, good thoughts here. And I think migration here would work, but I need further, explanation from people. Yeah. But sometimes, political orientation. This is a bit absurd. I need further. You need to think further whether this could be used as a direct means to achieve your purpose. Okay, and let's just move on. So sometimes we also need to know, where is my eraser? We also need to know, mobility could be predetermined. It's hard to really to make a change, to move, especially across generations. If say there is a saying in Chinese, what is that? 龙生龙，凤生凤。虫孩子会打洞 Dragons give birth to dragons. Phoenix give birth to phoenix. Worms. Children of worms are good at digging holes. So that kind of suggests that, mobility could be predetermined, and it's really hard to change. Although it's a fluid concept, it's hard to change. That's why you need to use different means to change, and marriage could be one. Okay, so let's do some quizzes together. I think we all understand the concept of mobility. Let me get my eraser to erase these messy writings, and then let's do that together. 8, First one is, which of the following is necessary in order for a society to have social mobility? Oh, I think my, okay. Have a think about it. But I want us to do it a bit quicker. Yeah. Which of the following is necessary in order for society to have social mobility? The key term here is social mobility, right? We just talked about, and I can see people choosing different answers. But stratification is the answer, because you need that hierarchy, right? You need that hierarchy so that you can move either up or down. Yeah. And so B. I have to erase that all the time. Okay. Which is true regarding achieved status? Which is true? Regarding achieved status. Yeah, this is quite apparent, right? They are related to social mobility. Yeah. And next one, I have to erase that again. Okay. Which of these is an example of upward social mobility? Okay, very good. Yeah. And that's A. And next one. It is possible to move downward in a stratification system. Is that correct? Yes, it is true. And social, let me erase that again. Okay. Social mobility is defined as the mobility to move across ranks in a stratified society. True or false? True. Yeah. Good. And move on. Australia is considered a closed system. Which one is that? Okay, false. Australia is an open system. Yeah, that's why we're all here, right? And the next one is hypogamy is a form of what? The term hypogamy. Choose again. Hypogamy is a form of downward mobility. Good. And for upward mobility, that's called hypergamy. Yeah. Okay. Move on to next quiz. Which of the following is an example of vertical mobility? Vertical, up or down? Okay, good. C is correct. Yeah, because a machine operator is promoted. So the word here is promoting. Okay, good. And let me get should be the last quiz soon. And next one. John is a manager at an auto manufacturing plant. His family has been working with the company for years. His father used to work in fabrication. His grandfather was employed as a loader who moved materials into the factory. What type of mobility does this scenario describe? So here that mentions John, and then John's father and John's grandfather. Very good. That's a intergenerational mobility. If that's the changes happening to John only, then that is a intragenerational mobility. Okay, good. And that's the last one. So we're all clear of the different types of mobilities now. And now we're moving to part 3, marriage migration. And always keep in mind the concept of mobility when we are talking about migration. So China opened it up in 1979, opening up economic reform policy, right? This is also a time that eternal marriage migration started because people gained mobility, right? And because in cities that need labor to work, and because of the relaxed policies by the government, a lot of people were floating, migrating from rural areas to urban areas, especially women. This is a very gendered migration pattern because a lot of migrants, they were women coming from rural China to urban China to seek employment opportunities, to increase their life chances. They want to change their status. They want to, they want to become richer. They want to marry well, etc. So the reasons is, and also the phenomena is what you see is many women actually migrating from undeveloped West in China to developed East China. So inter-provincial long-distance migration is pretty common. So those women, they bear hardship. They, travel long distance from one area to the other. And the reason is there are push and pull factors. The push factor is peasant women. They were constrained by the hukou system. So they migrating to developed rural regions or urban areas through marriage to enlarge their life chances. They want that change. It's they themselves, they want that. Yeah. And that's women's agency. You can put it that way. And that's the push factor. And for the pull factor is, the hukou, China's household registration system is pretty, used to be very strict, and now it's getting much more relaxed. That gives people more mobility, migrating across different places, because earlier people couldn't really move freely, but only during the opening up period they could. So because of that, people gained mobility. They could move freely, and that increased the population mobility. And plus China's economic reform Ooh. Sorry, I dropped out just now. I'm back. Yeah, I'm totally back. And can you hear me? You see me? Okay, good. Let's continue. We just have a little bit left. We're here. Okay. We were talking about migration just now. China's internal migration. So those women were facing a lot of difficulties in the urban job market, gender discrimination, etc. And there were stereotypes. And who were those, people who married those peasant women? Mostly there were men with lower social economic status in urban China, and who had, less money, and who also needed the care from those women coming from rural China. So this is kind of stereotyping that we know, but that also suggests some elements of truth. And for those women, they also face risks, being trafficked and being abused inside China. We are not talking about international migration yet, but for those women inside China, they're migrants, they're facing those difficulties, stereotypings and discriminations, etc. And that's very similar to transnational marriage migration in Asia. And when we're talking about transnational marriage migration in China, it's also from this is very vertical mobility. You will see mostly is women coming from the undeveloped East traveling to the developed West. For example, women coming from poor area of China, India, traveling to the USA, UK, Western Europe, North America, etc. And their motivation could be different: love, economic purpose, wealth, citizenship, etc. But all of these are intertwined with love. It's a complex thing. And those women also face being trafficked and being abused. And there's gendered there are also paradoxes in this mobility process. Imagine, say, highly educated women coming from the Philippines, marrying a truck driver in the US who received very little education. This create a paradox there, isn't it? So geographically it's upward, but in terms of educational level it's downward. So that is paradoxes there. That's in this mobility process. And when we're talking about Chinese foreign marriage, this is also a very interesting gendered phenomenon, because the majority, around 80%, are women marrying foreign men rather than the other way around. It started in 1970s, and China used to, be closed, where you see a lot of communities were heavily gated. But ever since the 1970s, things started to change. Chinese foreign marriages started to grow, and that's because people gained more mobilities due to the policies, etc., developed by the state. And from 2000 onwards, people increased the social mobility. They especially the globalization started to accelerate, etc. And that reversed this people's migration pattern, because earlier, when we talk about Chinese foreign marriage, is normally women migrating from less developed places to developed countries like in the US, UK. But nowadays, ever since the 2000s, it started to reverse, because a lot of foreigners coming from developed countries are going back to China, or couples decided to relocate from developed places to China. And at the same time, you started to see brides from Southeast Asia, Africa, or India, more and more of those people, both men and women, especially women, migrating to China to seek employment opportunities or for other purposes. So that's the trend that you see. Marriage figure started to grow really fast from 1979. Then to 2001, that reached the peak. Before that started to decline since the early 2000s. If you're interested, you can read my book, Love and Marriage in Globalizing China. That touched on some of the gendered patterns in intercultural marriages and the mobilities that we're talking about. And we don't have time for this, but just to have a think, the forms of mobilities. When we talk about international migration, especially marriage migration, and be able to identify the locations where brides are trafficked to and from China, and some other questions. And the terminologies for this week's lesson include different types of mobilities we mentioned: upward, downward, horizontal, vertical, intergenerational mobility, etc. And also hypergamy, marrying up, hypogamy, marrying down, endogamy, marriage within the same social category or social economic status, etc. And the family planning policies, the 4-to-1 problem, and also changes of China's marriage law, and the pros and cons of China's family planning policy, etc. So this is what we discussed today. And the final thing I would like you to do is to do that after class by clicking on the link that will take you to a very short survey, and that's anonymous. I will be able to see that, and if you click on that later, you would you could spend around maybe less than 5 minutes. So the purpose is that I would like to gather some of your feedback so that I can further adjust what I do at the moment, and to further enhance our learning experience. And so before we go, do you have any questions I can help with? Feel free to ask. Yeah. And you don't have to do the survey now, just do that after class. And we still have, some time, if you like. Any questions that I can help with? And if you need, if you want to talk to me privately, you can send me an email, and I'll send you a link. We can do virtual consultation. Yeah, but if you have any questions that you would like to ask now, please feel free to do so. Yeah. Everything is good? No questions? And for people who wanted to do the critical reflection, you could start doing now if you like, simply just to choose 5 weeks lessons, and then you write a critical reflection. I've put some scaffolding questions for you in the assessment brief, and you can see that in Moodle, and that's where you could see the updates there. Yeah. And I hope that will help, with people who wanted to do that task. And for the gender case study, I think everybody have a clear understanding of that, especially after we finished today's gender case study exercise in class. And for the rest, it's just, presentation, and then gender case study, essay writing, what else? Oh, and the personal interpretation, and that you can do, whichever you like. That's totally open. I want you to show your creativity, demonstrate your unique understanding about gender in China, but with scholarly references. Yeah, that can prove your point. Okay, as it's 12, I'm going to stay in case people have more questions that you want us to discuss as a group. If not, I will see you next week. I hope you have another wonderful week. Don't hesitate to ask for help. Ask me, ask Jane. We're here to help you. Okay, then enjoy your week. I'll see you next time.